He was thrown out of the store as a thief, but with one phone call he showed them who he really was. David Mitchell took a deep breath before pushing the glass door of the most luxurious dealership in New York City. His simple clothes contrasted with the gleaming environment, full of imported cars that cost more than he had managed to save his entire life. He had barely taken 3 steps when he heard the shrill shout coming from the reception. A woman in a black suit pointed directly at him, with an expression of pure contempt on her face. "Security! Get this man out of here now!" yelled Jennifer Parker, the store manager, without even attempting to lower her voice. "We don't want beggars in here scaring our customers." David stopped in the middle of the showroom, feeling all eyes turned toward him. Salespeople interrupted their conversations, customers turned their heads, and even the cleaning staff stopped working to watch the scene unfolding. "Ma'am, I just wanted to..." tried to explain David, keeping his voice calm despite the humiliation growing in his chest. "I don't want to hear excuses," interrupted Jennifer, walking toward him with firm steps that echoed on the marble floor. "You people always have a story to tell, always an excuse to enter where you don't belong." Marcus Johnson, the store security guard, approached reluctantly. He had worked there for almost 2 years and knew the manager's temperament well. He knew that questioning her orders would mean trouble for him, a man in his early 40s who couldn't afford to lose his job. "Sir, please, you need to leave," said Marcus, trying to sound professional but unable to hide the discomfort in his voice. "I just wanted to look at the cars," insisted David, keeping his hands where everyone could see them. "I'm not bothering anyone." Jennifer let out a bitter laugh that made several people in the store shift uncomfortably in their chairs. "Look at the cars," she repeated, as if David had told the most ridiculous joke she had ever heard. "Do you know how much the cheapest car in this store costs? $200,000. Do you have $200,000 in your pocket?" The silence that followed was deafening. David felt the heat rising up his neck but forced himself to maintain his composure. He had been through situations like this before, but never so publicly and humiliatingly. "It's not about having the money right now," replied David, carefully choosing his words. It's about getting out of here before I call the police," cut Jennifer, making an impatient gesture toward Marcus. "Get him out of here, now." Marcus hesitated for a moment. There was something about David's manner that didn't match the description Jennifer was giving of him. The man spoke well, maintained an upright posture, and there was a dignity in his eyes that didn't fit someone who was there to cause trouble. "Sir, it really is better if you go," murmured Marcus, lightly touching David's arm. It was then that Emily Thompson, the youngest salesperson on the team, rose from her desk. She was only 23 years old and had worked at the dealership for 6 months. From day one, she had noticed how Jennifer treated people who didn't fit the store's ideal customer profile differently. "Jennifer, perhaps we could just ask what the gentleman is looking for," suggested Emily, trying to intervene diplomatically. The look Jennifer gave her could have melted metal. "Emily, go back to your desk and mind your own business," hissed the manager. "You're still learning how things work here." It was true. Emily was still learning, but one of the things she had learned was that she didn't like the way Jennifer conducted business. She had witnessed other similar situations and always had a bitter taste in her mouth. David looked around the showroom one more time. He saw the curious faces, some showing pity, others demonstrating approval of the manager's attitude. He saw Marcus, who clearly wasn't comfortable with the situation, but had no choice. He saw Emily, who had tried to help and was now being reprimanded for it. "All right," said David finally. "I'll leave." But when he turned to go, Marcus followed Jennifer's instructions to the letter. The security guard grabbed him by the arm, more firmly than necessary, and practically pushed him toward the door. "Sorry," murmured Marcus quietly enough that only David could hear. David stumbled as he was pushed out of the store, nearly losing his balance on the entrance steps. Some people passing on the sidewalk stopped to watch, making that already humiliating situation even worse. Inside the store, Jennifer turned to the employees and customers with a satisfied smile. "I apologize for the interruption," she announced loudly. "Sometimes we have to deal with this kind of situation. But rest assured our security is strict, and we don't allow inappropriate people to disturb our customers." Some customers nodded approvingly, others looked uncomfortable. Emily returned to her desk with a knot in her stomach, while Marcus remained at the door, watching David through the glass. Outside, David slowly composed himself. He smoothed his wrinkled clothes and took a few deep breaths. Then, with his hands still trembling slightly, he took his cell phone out of his pocket. Jennifer was heading back to her office when she saw David through the store window, talking on the phone. For a moment, a twinge of unease passed through her, but she quickly dismissed the feeling. What harm could a man like that do? "Hello, Dr. Richard," said David on the phone, his voice now firmer. "This is David Mitchell. I'm here at the Elite Motors dealership in Soho." "Yes, sir. I'm doing the evaluation we discussed." Jennifer froze. Through the glass, she saw David gesturing as he spoke, clearly describing what had just happened. "No, sir," David continued. "I couldn't even get into the sales area. I was thrown out before I could even evaluate the service." "Yes, sir. Exactly as we suspected." Jennifer's blood ran cold in her veins. Dr. Richard was the name of the owner of the dealership chain, the man who signed her paycheck every month. "I'll send the preliminary report later today," said David, now pacing back and forth on the sidewalk. "Yes, sir. Are you sure you want me to continue?" "Understood. I'll come back in and introduce myself formally." Jennifer felt her legs go weak. She ran to the reception area and pressed her face against the glass, trying to hear the conversation better. "What do you mean, who am I?" David was saying, now looking directly at the store. "I'm David Mitchell, the new quality consultant you hired to do secret evaluations at all the chain's locations." "Yes, sir. The same David who grew up in the South Bronx and whom you met at the lecture on humanized service." Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, please take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It really helps us who are just starting out. Now continuing, Jennifer had to lean against the wall. David Mitchell. She knew that name. She had read about him in the email Dr. Richard had sent to all managers 3 weeks ago. A consultant specialized in customer service, hired to do secret evaluations and improve the quality of service across the entire chain. And she had just thrown him out of the store as if he were a criminal. "Emily!" called Jennifer, trying to keep her voice controlled despite the growing panic she felt. "Come here, quick." The young saleswoman approached, still confused by the whole situation. "That man," said Jennifer, pointing to David outside. Do you recognize him?" Emily looked through the glass, watching David, who was still on the phone. "No, I've never seen him before." "Why?" replied Emily, noticing the paleness on the manager's face. Jennifer didn't answer. She was trying to think of a way to fix the damage she had done. David ended the call and began walking back toward the store. "Marcus," Jennifer shouted to the security guard, "open the door for the gentleman arriving." Marcus looked at her, confused. It was the same man she had ordered to be thrown out 3 minutes earlier. "But manager, isn't he the same?" "I know who he is," interrupted Jennifer, trying to fix her hair and adjust her blazer. "Open the door and be polite." David pushed the glass door for the second time that morning. This time he was greeted by Marcus, who practically bowed when greeting him, and by Jennifer, who was walking quickly toward him with a forced smile on her face. "Mr. Mitchell," exclaimed Jennifer, extending her hand. "What a pleasure to welcome you to our store. I am Jennifer Parker, the manager. Dr. Richard has told me so much about you." David looked at the extended hand for a moment, before shaking it politely but coldly. "I imagine so," he replied, his voice neutral but full of meaning. "There was a small misunderstanding earlier," Jennifer continued, her words tumbling out. "Our security guard is very zealous, you know how it is. Customer protection, security protocol. I'm sure you understand." "I understand perfectly," said David, looking around the showroom where all the employees and customers were watching the interaction with curiosity. "And that's exactly what I came to evaluate." Jennifer's smile wavered. "Can I offer you some coffee?" she tried, gesturing nervously. "We have a special coffee, imported beans, or perhaps some tea. Water? Whatever you prefer." "No, thank you," David replied politely. "I prefer to start work immediately. I would like to speak with all the employees." Of course," Jennifer clapped her hands to get attention. "Everyone, please come here. We have an important meeting." The employees approached slowly, some still confused by the turn of events. Emily was among them, watching David with renewed curiosity. "This is Mr. David Mitchell," announced Jennifer with exaggerated enthusiasm. "He is a very important consultant hired by Dr. Richard to help us improve our service." David nodded to the group, his gaze passing over each face. When he reached Emily, he noticed she seemed different from the others. There was a sincerity in her eyes that contrasted with the obvious discomfort of the others. "You can count on our full cooperation," Jennifer continued. "We want to be the best unit in the network." "Great," said David. "Then I will need to speak with each of you individually. And I would also like to see the complaint records from the last 6 months." Jennifer's smile faltered for a moment. "Complaint records?" she repeated. "Well, we don't have many complaints here. Our service is exceptional." "Every establishment has complaints," David replied calmly. "It's part of the continuous improvement process. Where do you keep these records?" Jennifer exchanged a nervous glance with Marcus, who remained quiet near the door. I'll check on that for you," she said, stuttering slightly. "Perhaps they are filed in the office." "Perfect. Meanwhile, I would like to start the individual interviews." David looked at the group again. "Who would like to be first?" There was a moment of uncomfortable silence until Emily stepped forward. "I can start," she said, surprising everyone, including Jennifer. David smiled for the first time since he had entered the dealership. "Excellent. Is there a room where we can speak privately?" "You can use my office," Jennifer offered quickly, trying to maintain some control over the situation. "Actually, I'd prefer a neutral space," said David. "How about the employee break area?" Jennifer had no choice but to agree. She accompanied David and Emily to a small room at the back of the dealership, where there was a round table and some simple chairs. "May I join the interview?" asked Jennifer, trying to sound casual. "The interviews need to be individual to ensure honest answers," David explained politely but firmly. "It's standard procedure." Jennifer had no choice but to excuse herself, closing the door reluctantly behind her. Outside, she pressed her ear against the door, trying to hear the conversation. Inside the room, David sat at the table and gestured for Emily to do the same. "First, I want to apologize for what happened earlier," he said, his voice now warmer. "You tried to intervene and I saw that. Thank you." Emily blushed slightly. "What they did to you wasn't right," she said. "I knew something was wrong, but you're new here and didn't want to cause trouble," David completed. "I understand perfectly. How old are you, Emily?" 23, she replied. "I've worked here for 6 months. And how has the experience been?" Emily hesitated, looking toward the closed door. "You can speak freely," encouraged David. "Everything we discuss here is confidential. My goal isn't to harm anyone, but to improve the work environment for everyone." "It's complicated," admitted Emily. "Jennifer has very specific ways of doing things, and she doesn't like it when we question those ways." "What kind of ways?" Emily took a deep breath before answering. "She judges people a lot by their appearance. If someone doesn't fit what she considers an ideal customer, well, you saw what happens." "And does that happen often?" "More than it should," said Emily, lowering her voice. "Last week she told Marcus to kick out a young man who came to look at cars for his father. She said he was too young to have money to buy anything here." David made some notes on a small notepad. "And how do the other employees react to these situations?" "Most prefer not to get involved," admitted Emily. "Jennifer makes it clear that anyone who questions her decisions could have problems." "What kind of problems?" Emily looked at the door again before answering. "She controls the commissions, the schedules, the days off. If you're not on her side, your life here becomes difficult." David continued taking notes, his face showing growing concern. "Emily, have you witnessed other types of discrimination here?" "What do you mean?" "Besides the issue with customers' appearance, discrimination among employees, for example." Emily fell silent for a long moment, clearly wrestling with herself. "Can I trust you?" she finally asked. "You can," David replied sincerely. "My job is to identify problems and find solutions, not to harm people who are trying to do the right thing." "There's Mrs. Martha," said Emily, her voice dropping even lower. "She's worked in cleaning here for almost 10 years. Jennifer, she doesn't treat Mrs. Martha well." "How so?" She forbids Mrs. Martha from using the same restroom as us. Says it's to maintain the company hierarchy. And sometimes she talks to her in a way that isn't right. David stopped writing and looked directly at Emily. Can you give me specific examples? Last week, Mrs. Martha brought homemade snacks to share with the staff. She does that sometimes, you know. She's a very kind lady. Jennifer saw and said in front of everyone that cleaning staff shouldn't mix with salespeople. Mrs. Martha was very embarrassed. And the other employees? How did they react? Nobody said anything, admitted Emily with shame. I wanted to have said something, but you're afraid of losing your job, said David understandingly. It's natural, but thank you for telling me this. It's exactly the kind of information I need. They talked for another 15 minutes, with Emily reporting other incidents she had witnessed. When they finished, David thanked her again for her honesty. One last question, he said as they stood up. If you could change one thing in this store, what would it be? Emily thought for a moment. I would like all people to be treated with respect, she said finally. Customers, employees, everyone. It doesn't matter where they came from or how they dress. Everyone deserves dignity. David smiled and extended his hand to her. Thank you, Emily. You'll go far in life. When they left the room, they found Jennifer waiting anxiously outside, pretending to organize some papers. How did it go? She asked immediately. Very enlightening, replied David. Now I'd like to speak with Marcus. Marcus approached reluctantly, clearly uncomfortable with the whole situation. David noticed the man avoided eye contact. Marcus, isn't it? Said David when they entered the room. Yes, sir, replied Marcus, his large hands nervously playing with his security cap. How long have you worked here? Almost 2 years, sir. And before that? Marcus hesitated. I worked in several places. Mall security, building doorman, that kind of thing. David noticed the tension in the man's voice. Marcus, you don't need to be afraid to speak with me, he said gently. I'm not here to cause problems for you. I know you were just following orders earlier. Sorry about that, sir, said Marcus, finally looking at David. I didn't want to, but the manager... No need to apologize. I understand your position. David leaned forward. But I need to know, is this kind of situation common here? Marcus looked toward the door as if he expected Jennifer to appear at any moment. Sir, I need this job, he said finally. I have a young daughter and my wife is unemployed. And because of that you can't speak the truth? It's not that I can't. It's that it's complicated, you know. David nodded understandingly. Marcus, let me explain something. My job isn't to harm honest employees who are trying to support their families. My job is to identify systemic problems and fix them. If there are problems here, they will be corrected one way or another. The question is whether you want to be part of the solution or remain silent. Marcus took a deep breath. What happened today wasn't the first time, he admitted. The manager is very prejudiced against people who don't dress well or don't arrive in an expensive car. And you're forced to expel these people. She says it's to protect the real customers, Marcus made air quotes. Says poorly dressed people scare away the good clientele. And do you agree with that? Marcus lowered his head. No, sir. My father was a construction worker, wore simple clothes his whole life, but was the most honest man I knew. I don't like judging anyone by their clothes. Then why do you do it? Because I need the job, repeated Marcus. And because the manager makes it clear that anyone who doesn't follow her rules can look for another place to work. David made a few more notes. Marcus, have you seen the manager discriminate against employees too? Marcus hesitated again, the internal conflict visible on his face. Mrs. Martha, he began, then stopped. What about Mrs. Martha? She's treated differently from the others. The manager doesn't let her use the same restroom as us, doesn't let her participate in company celebrations. Sometimes she talks to her as if she were less important. And does that bother you? Very much, admitted Marcus. Mrs. Martha is a hard-working and honest woman. She deserves respect like anyone else. Thank you for your honesty, Marcus, said David, putting away his notepad. One more question. If things changed here, if there were a new way of working based on respect for all people, would you support this change? Absolutely, sir, replied Marcus without hesitation. It would be a relief not to have to dismiss innocent people just because they don't dress well. When they left the room, David asked to speak with Mrs. Martha. Jennifer became visibly uncomfortable with the request. Martha, she said as if it were an absurd idea. But she's in cleaning. She has nothing to do with customer service. All employees are part of the customer experience, explained David. I'd like to speak with her. Jennifer had no choice but to call Mrs. Martha, a 62-year-old woman who worked quietly organizing the products on display. Martha, come here, called Jennifer in a tone she didn't use with other employees. Mrs. Martha approached timidly, wiping her hands on her apron. Yes, Miss Jennifer? This gentleman wants to speak with you, said Jennifer, clearly annoyed with the situation. David extended his hand to Mrs. Martha with a warm smile. Mrs. Martha, very nice to meet you. I'm David Mitchell. I'd like to chat with you for a bit if you don't mind. Mrs. Martha looked surprised at the extended hand before shaking it timidly. Yes, of course, sir, she stammered, clearly not accustomed to receiving this kind of respectful treatment in the store. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, please take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It really helps us who are just starting out. Now continuing. In the private room, Mrs. Martha sat on the edge of her chair, hands clasped in her lap, clearly nervous. Mrs. Martha, how long have you worked here? Asked David gently. It'll be 10 years in December, sir, she replied, her voice soft but clear. 10 years, repeated David, impressed. You must have seen many changes here. Yes, sir, I've seen many people come and go. And how do you feel working here? Mrs. Martha hesitated, looking toward the door. It's a job, isn't it, sir? I need to work. But that doesn't answer my question, said David softly. How do you feel? That's different from asking if you need the work. Mrs. Martha lowered her voice even further. Sometimes it's hard, sir. Why? There are people who don't treat us very well. David leaned slightly forward, his voice maintaining its gentle tone. Could you give me an example? Mrs. Martha remained silent for a long moment, clearly debating with herself whether to speak. Can I trust you? She finally asked, echoing Emily's words. Yes, you can, Mrs. Martha. My job is to listen and try to improve things for everyone. Well, she began hesitantly. There are certain rules here that I'm not sure are right. What kind of rules? And I can't use the same restroom as the other employees, she said quickly, as if needing to get the words out before losing courage. And I can't have lunch at the same time as them. And when there's a company party, I'm not invited. David felt anger growing in his chest but kept his voice calm. Who established these rules? The manager. She says it's to maintain the... How does she say it? The company hierarchy. And how does that make you feel? Mrs. Martha's eyes filled with tears. It makes me feel small, sir. As if I were less of a person than others. David had to take a deep breath to control his emotion. Mrs. Martha, do you have family? I have 2 children and 4 grandchildren, she said, her face lighting up slightly. My children went to college, you know. One is a nurse and the other works at the bank. I'm very proud of them. And you should be, said David sincerely. And do your grandchildren know where you work? Yes, they do. Sometimes they stop by to pick me up after my shift, but I always ask them to wait outside. Why? Mrs. Martha lowered her head. Because I'm ashamed of how I'm treated in here. David had to pause before continuing. Mrs. Martha, have you ever thought about looking for another job? Oh, sir, who's going to hire a woman my age? She said with a sad smile. And after so many years here, I know the job. I know how to do things right. It's better to stay quiet and not cause trouble. But staying quiet when we're treated with disrespect shouldn't be normal, said David. Every worker deserves dignity, no matter what their job is. Mrs. Martha looked at him with a mixture of surprise and hope. Do you really believe that? I'm certain of it, David replied firmly, and I'll do everything in my power to make things better here. When they left the room, David noticed that all the employees were waiting anxiously, including Jennifer, who was clearly trying to guess what had been discussed. "Well," said David, addressing the group, "I'd like to speak with everyone together now." "Of course," said Jennifer quickly. "Shall we use my office?" "Actually, I prefer right here in the showroom," said David, "where everyone feels comfortable." They gathered near the reception area with David standing before the small group. Jennifer, Emily, Marcus, Mrs. Martha, and 2 more salespeople who had arrived for the afternoon shift. "First, I want to thank everyone for your cooperation," David began. "The individual conversations were very enlightening." Jennifer tried to maintain a neutral expression, but David could see the anxiety in her eyes. "Based on what I observed and heard today," he continued, "it's clear that this branch has some challenges that need to be addressed." "Challenges?" interrupted Jennifer. "Mr. Mitchell, I believe there must have been some misunderstanding. Our store has one of the best ratings in the network." "Ratings from whom?" asked David calmly. "From the customers, of course," replied Jennifer, but her voice faltered slightly. "And how do you collect these ratings?" Jennifer hesitated. "Well, through direct feedback from customers, and—" "Let me rephrase the question," interrupted David. "Do you have a formal system for collecting customer feedback, satisfaction surveys, an accessible complaint book?" The silence that followed was telling. "Mr. Mitchell," Jennifer tried again, "our clientele is very select. Polite, upper-class people. They're not the type to complain." "All people complain when they receive poor service," replied David. "The question is whether there's an appropriate channel for those complaints to be heard and addressed." David turned to the group. "During my research before coming here, I found some online reviews of this store. I'd like to share a few of them with you." He took his phone out of his pocket and began to read. "Completely prejudiced service. They judged my son by his age and refused to show him the cars." This review was from 2 weeks ago. Jennifer paled. "Manager was extremely rude. Treated my mother like she was a beggar just because she was wearing simple clothes." This one is from a month ago. David continued reading a few more similar reviews as the group listened in growing silence. "And my favorite," he said, looking directly at Jennifer. "Elitist and discriminatory environment. It seems they forgot they're selling cars, not screening for a social club." "Mr. Mitchell," Jennifer tried, her voice now trembling. "These reviews could be from competitors trying to harm our business, or from people who don't fit the customer profile you consider appropriate," David completed. Jennifer opened and closed her mouth several times, unable to formulate a response. "Let me explain something to all of you," David continued, his voice now firmer. "A successful company in the modern world cannot afford to discriminate against customers or employees. Besides being ethically wrong, it's terrible for business." He began to walk slowly as he spoke. "That young man who was thrown out last week, he went home and told his father, who coincidentally owns a logistics company with 40 trucks. 40 trucks that need to be replaced every 3 years. Do you think he'll buy here?" Emily swallowed dryly, remembering the incident. "The elderly lady who was treated disrespectfully. She's a widow of a businessman and has 3 adult children. Children who also bought cars here and who now take their business to the competition." Jennifer was now visibly sweating. "You're not just losing customers," David continued. "You're losing entire families, networks of contacts, referrals. You're destroying the brand's reputation." "But sir," one of the afternoon salesmen tried to intervene, "the manager always said that customers without money only waste time." "And who determines who has or doesn't have money?" David asked. "The clothes the person wears, the car they drive, the age they appear to be?" David stopped and looked at the group. "Let me tell you a true story. 5 years ago at a dealership in New York City, a man arrived wearing flip-flops, old shorts, and a torn t-shirt. The salesman completely ignored him. Do you know what happened?" The group waited in silence. "The man owned a transport company and was looking for 50 vans for his fleet. 50 vans. Do you know how much that represents in commission?" Emily did a quick mental calculation and widened her eyes. "He left the store without being served and closed the deal with the competition," David continued. "The salesman who ignored him lost the commission of a lifetime because of prejudice." "How do you know that story?" Marcus asked curiously. David smiled for the first time since he had started talking about the store's problems. "Because I was that man in flip-flops," he said calmly. The silence that followed was deafening. Everyone looked at David with a mixture of shock and disbelief. "It was that day that I decided to change careers," he continued. "I realized that if I, a successful businessman, was treated that way for wearing simple clothes, imagine how other people must be treated. I decided to specialize in helping companies improve their service standards." Jennifer was now clearly in panic. "Mr. Mitchell, we can improve. We can change. I know we may have been a bit too rigid with some protocols, but—" "Rigid?" David interrupted. "Jennifer, you prohibited an employee from using the same bathroom as the others. That's not rigidity. That's pure and simple discrimination." Mrs. Martha lowered her head, embarrassed by having her situation exposed publicly, but at the same time feeling a strange relief that someone was finally talking about it. "And it's not just about the employees," David continued. "You're creating a toxic environment that affects everyone. Emily, for example, is afraid to do her job properly because it might displease management." "That's not true," protested Jennifer. "Emily is an exemplary employee. Emily is an exemplary employee despite the work environment, not because of it," corrected David. "She could be much more productive and happy in a healthier environment." At that moment, the store door opened, and in walked a lady of about 70 years old, well-dressed, walking with the aid of an elegant cane. "Excuse me," she said politely. "I'm looking for the manager of this store." Jennifer immediately stepped forward, returning to her customer service mode for what she considered suitable clients. "That would be me, ma'am," she said with an exaggerated smile. "How can I help you?" "My name is Eleanor Williams," said the lady with dignity. "I came here in person because I called several times and didn't get a satisfactory response." "Oh," said Jennifer, clearly confused. "Response about what, Mrs. Eleanor?" "About the complaint I made 3 weeks ago," replied Eleanor, her voice firm despite her age. "About the absolutely unacceptable treatment I received in this store." David watched the scene with interest, noticing how Jennifer's expression instantly changed. "Complaint," repeated Jennifer, feigning surprise. "I'm sorry, but I don't recall any complaint from a lady named Eleanor." "Of course you don't remember," interrupted Eleanor, her voice now filled with indignation. "Because when I tried to speak with management that day, I was practically ignored." Eleanor turned to the gathered group. "I came here accompanying my granddaughter to buy her first car. A 22-year-old girl recently graduated with the exact amount of money she had saved while working through school." David paid full attention to the story, realizing where she was going with it. "When we arrived, I was wearing a simple dress because we had come straight from the hospital, where I received treatment," continued Eleanor. "My granddaughter was wearing jeans and sneakers. Apparently, we didn't look like suitable customers for this store." Jennifer began to sweat again. "We were completely ignored by the salespeople. When we finally managed to get someone's attention, we were met with a rudeness I can't even imagine where it came from." Eleanor looked directly at Jennifer. "The manager came over to us and suggested that perhaps we should look for a used car dealership because the prices here were incompatible with our budget." "Mrs. Eleanor, there must have been a misunderstanding," tried Jennifer, her voice growing increasingly high-pitched. "Misunderstanding," repeated Eleanor. "When my granddaughter showed the bank statement with $70,000, the expression on your face changed immediately. Suddenly, we were important customers." David crossed his arms, watching Jennifer squirm under the weight of the accusation. "But the damage was already done," continued Eleanor. "My granddaughter left here humiliated and swore she would never come back. We bought her car at the dealership in the mall, where we were treated with respect from the very first moment. Mrs. Eleanor, I'm very sorry if there was some misunderstanding," stammered Jennifer. "I can assure you it was not our intention." "Intention?" Eleanor laughed bitterly. "Ma'am, you judged us by our appearance and treated us like we were beggars. That wasn't a misunderstanding. That was pure and simple prejudice." David decided to intervene. "Mrs. Eleanor, allow me to introduce myself. I'm David Mitchell, a quality consultant. I'm here today specifically to investigate this type of situation." Eleanor looked at him with interest. "It's good that someone is finally paying attention to these issues," she said, "because it's not just about me or my granddaughter. It's about all the people who are judged and discriminated against by employees who think they can choose who deserves to be treated well and who doesn't." "You are absolutely right," David agreed, "and I guarantee measures will be taken." "I hope so," said Eleanor, "because you've lost more than a $70,000 sale. You've lost my trust, my family's trust, and certainly the trust of many other people I've told this story to." Jennifer seemed to want to hide somewhere. "Mrs. Eleanor," she tried once more, "if you'd like to give us a second chance." "A second chance?" interrupted Eleanor. "For what? For you to pretend to respect me because you now know I have money? No, thank you. I prefer to do business with people who treat all customers with dignity from the very beginning." Eleanor turned to leave, but stopped and looked at David. "I hope your work here produces real results," she said. "This store needs a complete overhaul of its values." After Eleanor left, the silence in the store was almost palpable. Everyone looked at Jennifer, who was visibly shaken. "Well," David said after a moment, "I think that perfectly illustrates the problems I identified today." "Mr. Mitchell," began Jennifer, her voice now pleading, "I know we may have made some mistakes, but we can fix this. I can train the team better, establish new protocols." "Jennifer," David interrupted gently but firmly, "the problem isn't protocols. The problem is fundamental attitudes and values." David turned to the group. "Let me be clear with all of you. Significant changes are going to happen in this store. The question is whether you want to be part of these changes or not." "What kind of changes?" asked Emily. "First, we're going to implement a real customer feedback system, satisfaction surveys, an accessible complaint book, and a clear protocol for resolving issues when they arise." David began to walk again as he explained. "Second, all employees will undergo training on humanized service and respect for diversity, and that includes treatment among co-workers." Mrs. Martha timidly raised her head. "Third, we will establish clear non-discrimination policies that apply to both customers and employees. No one will be treated differently because of appearance, age, social class, or role in the company. And fourth," he continued, looking directly at Jennifer, "we will conduct a complete evaluation of the current management and determine if it is aligned with the values we want to promote." Jennifer turned completely pale. "Mr. Mitchell, please. I've worked here for 5 years. I know all the customers, all the suppliers. If you give me a chance, I can change, I can be better." David studied her for a moment. "Jennifer, change isn't something that happens overnight. And more importantly, it's not something that can be forced from the outside in. It has to come from a genuine understanding that the current way of doing things is wrong." "I understand," she said quickly. "I see now that maybe I was too rigid, too—" "Jennifer," David interrupted her again, "you banned an employee from using the same restroom as others. That isn't rigidity, that is discrimination. And if you truly don't see the difference, then perhaps you are not the right person to lead a team." Mrs. Martha kept her head down, but David noticed her hands had stopped trembling. "I'm going to be very clear," David continued. "The changes will happen with or without you, Jennifer. The question is whether you have enough humility to recognize your mistakes and work to correct them, or if you will keep trying to justify the unjustifiable." Jennifer was silent for a long moment, clearly wrestling with herself. I don't want to lose my job," she finally said, her voice breaking. "No one wants to lose their job," replied David. "But keeping a job shouldn't come at the expense of other people's dignity." At that moment, the store phone rang. Emily answered and said it was for David. "Hello?" said David. "David? It's Richard," said the voice on the other end of the line. "How's it going over there?" "Dr. Richard, I found exactly what we expected to find," replied David, looking at the gathered group. "And some things we didn't expect." "Can you give me details?" "I'd prefer to present the full report in person, but I can say that significant changes are necessary." "I understand. I'll stop by in an hour so we can talk." "Perfect. See you soon." David hung up and turned to the group. "Dr. Richard is coming here in an hour," he announced. "I want everyone to stay and participate in the conversation." Jennifer grew even paler. Dr. Richard is coming here? Today? Yes, and he'll want to hear from each of you about your experiences here. During the next hour, David took the opportunity to make a few more observations. He saw how Jennifer was desperately trying to be extra kind to everyone, especially to Mrs. Martha. He noticed how Emily seemed more relaxed now that the problems were being addressed. He observed how Marcus remained professional, but clearly hopeful about the promised changes. When Dr. Richard arrived, he was a man of about 50, dressed casually but radiating natural authority. He greeted David warmly and then addressed the group. "Good afternoon, everyone," he said with a genuine smile. "I hope you're all cooperating with David here." "Yes, sir," some replied in unison. "Great. David, how about you present your findings to me?" David spent the next 20 minutes reporting his observations, including the individual interviews, the online reviews he had found, and the incident with Mrs. Eleanor that they had witnessed. Dr. Richard listened in silence, occasionally asking questions to clarify details. His expression grew more serious by the minute. "Jennifer," he said when David finished, "is this true? Did you really forbid an employee from using the same restroom as the others?" Jennifer opened and closed her mouth several times before she could respond. "Mr. Richard, it was a matter of organization, of company hierarchy." "Hierarchy," repeated Dr. Richard, his voice rising slightly. "Jennifer, what hierarchy justifies treating a human being like a second-class citizen?" I didn't think of it that way," she stammered. Dr. Richard turned to Mrs. Martha. "Mrs. Martha, how many years have you worked here?" 10 years, Doctor." "Richard?" she replied timidly. 10 years, he repeated, shaking his head. "And during those 10 years, were you treated like a second-class employee?" "Sir, I don't want to cause trouble for anyone," said Mrs. Martha. "You're not causing trouble. The trouble already existed. You're just being honest about it." Dr. Richard looked at the group. "Mrs. Martha, I want you to know this is going to change, starting today." Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, please take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It really helps us who are just starting out. Now, continuing. Dr. Richard turned to Jennifer again. "Jennifer, I'll be direct. What we've discovered here today does not represent our company's values. This is not how we do business, and it is definitely not how we treat our employees." "Dr. Richard, please," begged Jennifer. "Give me a chance to fix this. I can change. I can learn." "Jennifer, you had 10 years to learn how to treat Mrs. Martha with basic respect. You had 5 years as a manager to create a healthy work environment. How many more chances do you think you deserve?" Jennifer began to cry. "Please, Dr. Richard, I need this job. I have bills to pay, responsibilities." "And doesn't Mrs. Martha have them too?" asked Dr. Richard. "Doesn't Emily have them? Doesn't Marcus have them? The difference is, they manage to handle their responsibilities without humiliating other people." David watched the conversation in silence, seeing how Dr. Richard handled the situation. He was impressed with the businessman's firmness, but also with his humanity. "Jennifer," Dr. Richard continued, "I'll be clear, your position as manager ends today. I can't have someone leading a team who doesn't show basic respect for their own employees." Jennifer broke down in sobs. "But," Dr. Richard continued, "I will offer an alternative. You can remain with the company as a salesperson, going through an intensive training program on humanized service and respect for diversity. During this period, you will be under direct supervision, and any discriminatory behavior will result in immediate termination." Jennifer looked at him through her tears. "Salesperson?" she repeated. "Yes, starting from scratch, learning to do things the right way." Dr. Richard turned to the group. "The question is, are you truly willing to learn, or do you prefer to keep your pride?" Jennifer took a few deep breaths, clearly struggling with the decision. I accept," she said finally. "I want to learn. I want to be better." "Great," said Dr. Richard. "Now regarding the new management." He looked at the gathered group. "Emily," he said, "David reported very positive things about you. How about a promotion to assistant manager while we look for a new manager?" Emily's eyes widened. Me? But Dr. Richard, I only have 6 months of experience here. You have something more important than experience, he replied. You have character, and character isn't taught. You either have it or you don't. David smiled, approving the decision. Marcus, Dr. Richard continued, I want to expand your role. Beyond security, I'd like you to lead our new inclusive service protocols. You'll work directly with David on developing training programs. Marcus was speechless for a moment. Dr. Richard, I would be honored, he said finally. And Mrs. Martha. Dr. Richard turned to her with a warm smile. You will have a new title, Supervisor of Environment and Customer Experience. Your role will be to observe how customers feel in the store and report any problems directly to me. Mrs. Martha began to cry, but this time with joy. Dr. Richard, I don't even know what to say, she sobbed. You don't need to say anything, Mrs. Martha. Just keep being the upstanding person you've always been. Dr. Richard looked at the group. Now let's talk about the practical changes. David took the floor again. As I mentioned before, we will implement a complete customer feedback system, but we're also going beyond that. First, he said, counting on his fingers, we will create an ongoing training program on diversity and inclusion for all employees. Second, we will establish goals not just for sales, but for customer satisfaction, and these goals will directly affect performance reviews. Third, we will create a direct communication channel where any employee can report problems or suggestions without fear of retaliation. And fourth, we will implement a recognition program for employees who demonstrate excellence in humanized service. Dr. Richard nodded, approving each point. Excellent. And David, I'd like to make a proposal to you as well. David looked at him curiously. How would you like to become our Director of Customer Experience for the entire network? Asked Dr. Richard. What we discovered here today makes me think other branches might have similar problems. David was surprised by the offer. It's a tempting proposal, Dr. Richard. May I think about it? Of course, but I hope to have an answer soon. We need someone with your vision to transform our entire network. During the next hour, they worked together, defining the details of the changes. Jennifer, now calmer, admitted she knew her attitudes were wrong, but had convinced herself it was just how things work in the business world. The business world doesn't have to be cruel, explained David. In fact, companies that treat employees and customers well tend to be more successful in the long run. But how do I explain to wealthy clients that we now serve all kinds of people? Asked Jennifer, still struggling with some concepts. Jennifer, said Emily gently, truly wealthy clients aren't bothered by diversity. They're bothered by poor service. And we're going to provide excellent service to everyone. David was impressed with the maturity of Emily's response. Exactly, he agreed. And we'll find that many people we judged for not having money actually do, and others who don't have it today might have it tomorrow. Or they might have friends and family who do. Marcus contributed to the conversation. In my experience as security, the most problematic people are usually those who think they're superior to others, not the humble folks. Very well observed, Marcus, said Dr. Richard, and that's exactly the kind of insight we want to capture and use to improve our business. When the meeting ended, it was late afternoon. Dr. Richard thanked everyone for their honesty and cooperation, promising to return the following week to check on the progress. David, he said before leaving, I want an answer about my proposal by Friday. You'll have it, promised David. After Dr. Richard left, the group kept talking informally. Jennifer timidly approached Mrs. Martha. Mrs. Martha, she said, her voice trembling, I want to apologize, truly. I know I can't undo what I did, but I want you to know I'm ashamed of my behavior. Mrs. Martha looked at her for a moment before responding. Jennifer, holding a grudge won't help anyone. If you truly want to change, I'll be rooting for you. Jennifer began to cry again, but this time they seemed like tears of relief. Thank you, she murmured. I'll work hard to deserve this second chance. David watched the scene with satisfaction. Real change was possible when people were willing to acknowledge their mistakes and grow from them. A week later, David returned to the dealership for a follow-up visit. The transformation was immediately visible. There was a banner at the entrance announcing "Respectful service for all customers" and a clearly visible suggestion box near the reception desk. Emily was conducting a morning meeting with the team, discussing the customer satisfaction goals for the week. Marcus was training a new employee on the importance of treating all customers equally. Mrs. Martha was walking around the dealership with a badge that read Customer Experience Supervisor, talking to customers and observing interactions, and Jennifer was helping a young couple buying their first car. David observed discreetly and was impressed by the patience and kindness she showed. "David," Emily approached him with a radiant smile, "so good to see you." "How's it going?" he asked. "Better than I could have imagined," she replied. "Yesterday we completed our first full week with the new system, and our customer satisfaction score was the highest in the network. And Jennifer, how is she adapting?" Emily looked toward the saleswoman. "It's been a process, but she really seems to want to change. Yesterday she assisted an elderly lady for 3 hours, helping her choose a car that would be easy for her to drive. The lady left saying she had never been treated so well." David smiled. "And Mrs. Martha?" "She's loving her new role. Yesterday she identified a problem with the accessibility of our waiting area, and we've already implemented the fixes. Customers are noticing that we really care about their comfort." Marcus approached them. "Mr. David," he greeted, "I wanted to thank you again for the opportunity. I'm developing an inclusive service manual based on our experiences here." "That's great, Marcus. Dr. Richard mentioned he wants to implement this manual in all locations." "It's true. He asked me to visit the other stores next week to present the program." David spent a few hours observing the store's operations. He saw Jennifer assist a customer who was wearing simple work clothes and treat him with the same respect she would give anyone else. He saw Emily resolve a dissatisfied customer's problem patiently and effectively. He saw Mrs. Martha suggest improvements to the store layout that made the environment more welcoming. In the late afternoon, Dr. Richard arrived for his weekly visit. "David," he greeted warmly, "have you decided about my proposal?" "I have," replied David. "I accept the position of Director of Customer Experience." "Excellent," exclaimed Dr. Richard. "When can you start?" "Actually," said David with a smile, "I think I've already started." Dr. Richard laughed. "True. And from what I see here, you're doing an excellent job." They held a meeting with the entire team to evaluate the progress of the first week. The results were impressive. A 40% increase in customer satisfaction, 25% more sales, and 0 formal complaints. "But the most important thing," said Dr. Richard, "is that you've created an environment where everyone feels respected and valued. And that reflects in the quality of service, Mrs." Martha timidly raised her hand. "Dr. Richard, may I say something?" "Of course, Mrs. Martha. In 10 years working here, these were the first weeks where I felt proud to tell my grandchildren where I work." The silence that followed was deeply moving. Jennifer discreetly wiped away a tear. "Thank you, Mrs. Martha," said Dr. Richard. "That is the best evaluation our company could receive." 3 months later, the Soho location had become the network's benchmark for customer service. David had implemented the program in all 23 of the company's locations, adapting the strategies to each region's particularities. Emily had been promoted to full manager and was being prepared to eventually supervise other locations. Marcus had become the lead instructor of the Inclusive Service program and traveled across the country training teams. Mrs. Martha had created a humanized hospitality manual that was being adopted by other companies in the industry, and Jennifer had become one of the network's highest-rated salespeople, known for her patience and dedication in understanding each customer's real needs. "What impresses me most," said David during an annual review meeting, "is how simple attitude changes can have such profound impacts." "They weren't simple changes," corrected Dr. Richard. "They were fundamental changes. We changed the company's culture." "And the best part," added Emily, "is that now other companies are approaching us to learn how to make the same transformation." David nodded. In recent months, he had received dozens of invitations to speak about organizational transformation and humanized service. "You know what we learned from all this?" he said to the group. that treating people with dignity isn't just the right thing to do, it's also the smartest thing to do from a business perspective. And it's sustainable, added Marcus. Because happy employees make happy customers, and happy customers make thriving businesses. Mrs. Martha, now with the title of Director of Employee Experience, smiled. My grandchildren now visit me at work every week, she said. And they always comment on how everyone here seems happy. To them, this is normal. They'll grow up expecting to be treated with respect wherever they go. That might be our greatest achievement, said David. We're helping raise a new generation that won't accept discrimination as something normal. The conversation was interrupted by the arrival of a special visitor. It was Eleanor Williams, the lady who had confronted Jennifer months before. Mrs. Eleanor, exclaimed Emily, standing up to greet her. What a joy to see you here. I came to bring my granddaughter, said Eleanor with a smile. She wants to trade in her car and specifically asked to come here. She said she heard many good things about the changes you've made. David approached. Mrs. Eleanor, remember me, I'm David Mitchell. Of course I remember, she said, shaking his hand warmly. I want to personally thank you for the work you've done here. The difference is impressive. What made you change your mind about our dealership? Asked Dr. Richard. Comments from friends who were served here recently, answered Eleanor. Everyone mentioned how respected and well taken care of they felt, and my granddaughter read the online reviews. Now you have the best ratings in the city. Jennifer approached the group timidly. Mrs. Eleanor, she said, her voice hesitant. I don't know if you remember me. I do remember, answered Eleanor, but without hostility. I wanted to personally apologize for what happened. I was completely wrong, and I hope you can forgive me. Eleanor studied Jennifer for a moment. Young lady, what matters isn't the mistake we make, but what we do to correct it. From what I see here, you've done a lot to make things right. Jennifer sighed with relief. Thank you for your generosity, Mrs. Eleanor. And now, said Eleanor, turning to Emily, my granddaughter will be here in 15 minutes. Can you help us find a good car for a young lawyer? It will be our pleasure, answered Emily with enthusiasm. As the group dispersed to resume their activities, David watched the scene with deep satisfaction. The transformation that had begun with his humiliation at the dealership entrance now spread far beyond those walls. What are you thinking about? Asked Dr. Richard, approaching him. I was thinking about how events that seem negative can sometimes lead to extraordinary positive transformations, answered David. If I hadn't been thrown out of here that day, maybe we never would have discovered these problems. And dozens of people would still be discriminated against daily, added Dr. Richard. Exactly. Sometimes we need to go through difficult moments to find the path to something better. At that moment, they saw Eleanor's granddaughter arriving, a well-dressed young lawyer who entered the dealership with confidence. Emily welcomed her warmly, and within minutes, they were engaged in an animated conversation about cars. You know what makes me proudest? Said David, watching the scene. What? That now when someone walks into this dealership, the first thing we ask isn't, does this person have money to buy? But rather, how can we help this person? And that small shift in perspective makes all the difference in the world. Dr. Richard nodded. And we're discovering that when you truly want to help people, business comes naturally. Sales have increased because customers feel they can trust us. And employees work better because they feel valued, David added. It's a virtuous cycle. They were interrupted by Marcus, who approached with a broad smile. Mr. David, I just got a call from headquarters. They want to implement our program in 50 more stores in the countryside. 50 stores, David repeated, impressed. And there's more, Marcus continued. Other dealership networks are interested in hiring our consulting services. Dr. Richard smiled. It seems you'll need a bigger team, David. Actually, David said, I was thinking of proposing something. How about we create an institute dedicated to transforming corporate environments? Not just dealerships, but any company that wants to create a more inclusive and human culture. Mitchell Institute for Organizational Transformation, suggested Dr. Richard. Or Workplace Dignity Institute, David countered. What matters isn't my name, but the purpose. I like the second option, said Marcus. It makes it clear what it's about. Mrs. Martha joined the conversation. "May I suggest something?" she said timidly. "Of course, Mrs. Martha. How about including schools and hospitals too? These problems don't just exist in companies." David stopped and looked at her with admiration. "Mrs. Martha, that's a brilliant idea. Social transformation through changes in all institutions." "And universities," added Emily, who had overheard the conversation. "Imagine the impact if we could train a new generation of professionals who already graduate with this mindset." "Now you're thinking big," said Dr. Richard enthusiastically. "I'm willing to be the first investor in this institute." David felt a deep emotion growing in his chest. What had started as a project to improve a single store was turning into something much bigger. "You know what?" he said to the group. "When I was thrown out of this store a few months ago, I felt anger and humiliation, but now I realize that moment was the catalyst for something that could impact thousands of lives. Sometimes the most difficult moments lead us to the most important purposes," Mrs. Martha said wisely. "Exactly," David agreed. "And now we have the opportunity to ensure that other people don't go through what I went through or what you went through, Mrs. Martha." Jennifer approached the group, clearly hesitant to interrupt. "Sorry," she said. "Can I say something?" "Of course, Jennifer," David encouraged. "I wanted to thank all of you for not giving up on me," she said, her voice emotional. "I could have been fired and forgotten, but you gave me the chance to grow and change. And I want you to know that this transformed not just my professional life, but my life as a person." "Jennifer," David said, "your transformation is proof that real change is possible when people are willing to work for it. And your example will inspire other employees in other companies," added Dr. Richard. "You'll be part of our success stories." At that moment, Eleanor and her granddaughter approached the group, clearly pleased with the service. "We closed the deal," Eleanor announced happily. "And I want to say that today's experience was completely different from the one I had months ago." "Different how?" David asked, always interested in specific feedback. "From the moment we walked in, we felt welcome," explained Eleanor's granddaughter. "No one judged us, no one assumed anything about our budget. Emily simply asked what our needs were and helped us find the perfect car. And they treated my grandmother like an experienced consultant, not like a lady who was getting in the way," added the young lawyer. "That made all the difference." David smiled. "That's exactly what we want to hear." "More than that," said Eleanor, "I'm going to recommend this dealership to everyone I know. And I know a lot of people." After Eleanor and her granddaughter left, the group gathered for one last conversation before closing time. "Do you all realize what we've accomplished?" said David, looking around. "We haven't just improved business. We've created a model that can be replicated anywhere. And more importantly," said Mrs. Martha, "we've created an environment where everyone can be treated with dignity." "You know what my favorite part of all this is?" said Emily. "What?" several asked at once. "It's that now when people come in here and see how we operate, they leave expecting to be treated the same way elsewhere. We're raising people's standard of expectation." Marcus nodded vigorously. "And when those people get poor service elsewhere, they'll complain, they'll demand better. That will force other companies to improve too." "Exactly," exclaimed David. "Social change happens when people stop accepting the unacceptable as normal." Dr. Richard looked at his watch. "Everyone, I need to go, but first I want to make an announcement." Everyone paid attention. "I've decided this dealership will become the regional headquarters for our transformation program. And all of you, if you want, will lead the expansion to other cities." The group's enthusiasm was palpable. "This means our story is just beginning," said David, "and that your example will inspire transformations far beyond what we can imagine today," added Dr. Richard. When David left the dealership that night, he stopped for a moment on the sidewalk and looked back. Through the window, he could see Emily organizing the day's reports, Marcus reviewing safety protocols, Mrs. Martha lovingly tidying up the space, and Jennifer studying customer service materials. 6 months earlier, he had been thrown out of that place like a criminal. Now, that same place was a symbol of transformation and hope. He took out his phone and made a call. "Hi, honey," he said when his wife answered. "Hi, how was your day?" "Intense, but very rewarding." David began walking along the sidewalk. "You know that dealership where I was humiliated? The car dealership? Of course I remember. Today it sold 3 cars to people that other salespeople probably would have judged by their appearance, and every customer left saying they'd never been treated so well." "That's wonderful," said his wife. "And how do you feel?" David stopped and thought for a moment. "I feel hopeful," he finally said. "Hopeful that we can really change the world, one person, one company, one attitude at a time." "You managed to turn pain into purpose," she said with pride in her voice. "It wasn't just me," corrected David. "It was a whole team of people who decided they had the power to do things differently. And that's the most important lesson. Change happens when ordinary people decide to do extraordinary things." When he got home that night, David sat down to write the first report of what would become the Workplace Dignity Institute. He began with these words: "This project was born from a moment of humiliation that turned into an opportunity for transformation. We learned that when we treat all people with dignity and respect, we don't just create better work environments, we create a better society. And we discovered that this is not only the right thing to do, but also the smartest thing to do." As he wrote, David thought of all the people who still face discrimination daily in their jobs, in stores, in schools, in hospitals. He thought of how many talents were wasted because people were judged by their appearance instead of their character. But he also thought of Emily, who now led with wisdom beyond her years, of Marcus, who had become an educator passionate about social justice, of Mrs. Martha, who finally had a voice and recognition, and even of Jennifer, who had found the courage to admit her mistakes and work to correct them. If transformation was possible there, it was possible anywhere. The last paragraph of his report said, "The future we imagine is one where no child grows up thinking it's normal to be treated with disrespect, where no worker accepts humiliation as the price of employment, where no customer is judged by their appearance. This future is not just a dream, it's a choice, and we choose to make it a reality." 3 years later, the Workplace Dignity Institute had transformed over 500 companies across the United States. Emily ran the New York City branch, Marcus coordinated the national training programs, and Mrs. Martha had become a sought-after speaker on social inclusion in the workplace. And Jennifer? She opened her own consulting firm, helping other professionals overcome prejudices and create more inclusive environments. Her personal transformation story became one of the Institute's most inspiring cases. But for David, the most rewarding moment came when he received a letter from a 17-year-old girl. "Mr. David, my name is Sarah, and I work part-time at a clothing store. Yesterday, my manager wanted to kick out an older lady because she thought she didn't fit our brand profile. I remembered your story and found the courage to intervene. We discovered the lady was buying clothes for her daughter, who had landed a new job. She spent nearly $2,000 and left very happy. My manager was embarrassed and thanked me. Thank you for teaching me that one person can make a difference." David kept that letter on his desk because it proved that the transformation that had begun at a dealership in New York City was spreading far beyond what they could have imagined, and that sometimes the most painful moments of our lives can become the catalysts for our most important purposes. The lesson was forever etched. When we choose to treat every person with dignity and respect, we don't just change individual lives, we change the world. End of story. Now tell us, what did you think of this transformation story? Have you ever experienced a similar situation or know someone who faced prejudice? Leave your opinion in the comments and share your experience. Do you believe changes like these are possible in real life? We would love to read your honest thoughts about this journey of overcoming injustice.